Hello guys, this is the Global Bhartiya and today we are going to talk about one of the most bizarre and outright offensive videos that I stumbled upon the internet. This video is made by Prager U. As many of you might know, Prager U is an American right-wing media organization that makes this sort of right-wing videos on various subjects ranging from economics to politics to culture, religion, society, and as a whole, as a right wing commentator, I used to like their videos. Their stance on extreme political correctness and left leaning media bias was actually quite impressive. But then I stumbled upon this piece of monstrosity. This is nothing short of blatant racism and idiocy. Let us have a look.
Over the last 400 years, what power has done the most to spread the ideals of limited government, an independent judiciary, certain inalienable rights, and free markets? That power would be the British Empire. It was Britain that gave these ideals to the United States.
Okay, so let me get a few things straight at first. It were not the British but the French actually who introduced this idea of certain inalienable rights to all of its citizens. And coming to the independence of the judiciary part, I am sure that the British tried to ensure the independence of the judiciary back home in United Kingdom, but in her colonies the situation was quite dire. Here in India, the judiciary was heavily influenced by the British officers of the Imperial Raj, and there were widespread cases of harassments and discriminations against native-born Indians.
It was Britain that gave these ideals to the United States. It was the British Empire, the largest empire the world has ever known, which made these ideals global aspirations.
So we are only a few seconds into this video and I'm already feeling kind of frustrated by seeing the amount of misinformations being peddled in this video by this man. Really? United Kingdom was an inspiration? For whom? For fellow colonialists like the French and the Portuguese and the Spanish? Because in her colonies, United Kingdom was not respected. Here in India, we respected the French, the Americans, for their revolutionary zeal, for their strive for equality. We respected the Greeks for inventing democracy. Even the Romans. Yes, the British Empire did certain good things for India, like the building of railroads and strengthening the concept of Indian unity. But all of these benefits were not done by the British Empire for the well-being of Indians. These were done in order to fulfill their own selfish economic interests to greater efficiency.
It was the British Empire, along with America, that defended these ideals in two colossal world wars.
Just to make it clear here that the United Kingdom or the British Empire, as it was known back then, did not join both the world wars in order to safeguard the civil liberties of the global citizens. In fact, it had joined both the wars just in order to safeguard its own selfish colonial interests. The First World War was a war fought between two rivaling colonial forces, and the Second World War was fought as a result of Chamberlain's idiocy. That's it.
Freedom was an Englishman's right, and wherever he went, he took that right with him.
Yes, freedom indeed was an Englishman's right, sort of an exclusive right that only an Englishman could enjoy. No one of African or Asian background was entitled to enjoy it. Rightly said, sir.
Whether he was an English colonist in America, governing himself through a locally elected assembly,
And destroying the lives and properties of millions of Native Americans.
or an English adventurer like Sir Stamford Raffles, creating the free market city-state of Singapore, or an English officer like T.E. Lawrence, leading Arab tribesmen against the Turks.
Just to remind you guys, this T.H. Lawrence is the same Lawrence of Arabia who famously lied to and deceived the gullible Arab people and divided the Arab lands in between the selfish English and French colonialists in what was known as the Sykes-Picot Agreement.
The British always thought of themselves as liberators, as bringers of freedom.
Well, I consider myself to be better than PewDiePie, but really, does it prove anything? I don't think so.
The British believed the final and necessary justification of their empire was a moral one. The British kept the peace. They brought sound, honest.
Alright, so that's why the British Empire caused thousands of artificial famines during their rule in India. During the 1942 famine, they did not prevent the death of 3 million Bengalis, when clearly countries like Canada and Australia were quite eager to help. That's the legal and moral responsibility of the British Empire for you.
The British kept the peace. They brought sound, honest administration. And they insisted that basic moral standards were honored. The British did not try to nation build in the way we think of it now. They were under no illusions about making Arabs or Afghans or Zulus into Englishmen. They were more than content to leave people alone, to let them be themselves.
So this out here is the most misleading piece of information that I have encountered in this video. The British were the masters of mass conversions. They converted millions and millions of innocent tribal Indians into Protestant Christianity. Not only that, India's system of traditional education was replaced by the British system of education. The IAS examination, the examination by which India's civil servants were selected, was solely based on English. That's why thousands and thousands of Indian aspirants were forced to learn English. The pressure on the Indian people was so intense that people soon began to anglicize their names and surnames to fit the standards of their imperial overlords.
To govern them with the lightest possible hand. In American history, we remember this when we think of the British Empire's so-called benign neglect.
Probably it was benign neglect for settler colonies like United States and Australia, but one thing I can assure you is that for colonies in Asia and Africa, it was not benign neglect. It was cancerous repression.
We can see it throughout the history of the British Empire. Think about the vast territory of the Sudan. It was governed by 140 British civil servants. Even Gandhi praised the British Empire, paraphrasing Jefferson, saying that he believed that the best government was the government that governed least, and that he found that the British Empire guaranteed his freedom and governed him least of all.
So this here is a clear example of cherry picking, because this man points out only to that one time when Gandhi actually praised the British Empire and left out the thousands and thousands of time when Gandhi actually criticized and ridiculed the tyrannical rule of the oppressive British Empire.
In the defense of freedom, the empire drew moral lines. No power did more to abolish slavery and the slave trade in the modern world than did the British Empire. The British Treasury.
So this man here is clearly unaware of the fact that millions of Indian people were taken against their will to work as forced laborers in far off destinations. Today, if you look at the demographics of Fiji, Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, Mauritius or Seychelles, you will find a surprisingly high number of Indians living there. These people are the descendants of those bonded laborers.
Spent enormous sums to liberate slaves and compensate slave owners in the Caribbean. The Royal Navy had as a primary duty the eradication of the slave trade, and in fact abolishing the slave trade became a major factor driving the expansion of the British Empire. The British enforced a Pax Britannica, putting down pirates, taming headhunters, and keeping the peace between previously warring tribes and religions.
Surprisingly enough, it was quite the other way around here in India. Ordinary Hindus and ordinary Muslims in India had been living together in relatively peace and harmony, but after the advent of the British forces, these communities were communalized and made to hate one another. This was done by the British doctrine of divide and rule, as per which the British forces often appeased one community and victimized the other, leading to racial and religious tensions and ultimately building up to the partition of India.
While respecting and often ruling through local leaders, the British still insisted on certain Judeo-Christian moral standards. They were not, in that respect, multiculturalists. They had a firm sense of right and wrong. When Sir Charles Napier was confronted by the practice of suttee, widow burning, in India, he told the Brahmin priests involved that he understood it was their custom. But the British had a custom too. They hanged men who burned women alive and their goods were confiscated. So if the Brahmins insisted on continuing their tradition of widow burning, then he would insist on following his British tradition of hanging the murderers of widows. Widow burning in India soon ceased.
So, this is one of the positives of the British rule in India. We must acknowledge that. We must be thankful to kind hearted British officers like Napier. But these officers were few and far in between. Mostly, the British were too busy in minding their own selfish interests rather than reforming the society.
But we don't have to dig far into history, into the abolition of slavery and widow burning, to find the British Empire on the side of moral right and freedom. We can think of events within our own lifetimes or those of our parents and grandparents. When we think of the two deadliest threats to freedom in the 20th century, we generally think of communism and Nazism.
Both of these things actually arose as a reaction of colonialism. Nazism arose in Germany as Hitler and like-minded people were not impressed by the repressive terms imposed on Germany by the colonial forces after the First World War. And communism was broadly a reaction of the working class people against the bourgeoisie, of the oppressed people against the oppressors, and certainly of the colonized people against their colonizers.
But how many remember that in 1940, after the Hitler-Stalin Pact and after the fall of France, one power, the British Empire, stood alone in mortal combat against the combined tyrannies of the world?
Clearly, the British joined the war when they had to join the war. There was nothing else left to be done. By this point of time, the situation was pretty much out of their control. If Britain was some kind of moral messiah, then where was she when the Führer's forces were invading Czechoslovakia? In fact, Neville Chamberlain signed the famous Munich Agreement with Hitler. So clearly, the British did not join the Second World War out of any legal responsibility or moral responsibility. It only did so when its own position was in danger.
Even where the British have merited criticism, as in Ireland, there is more to the imperial story. During negotiations to create the Irish Republic, for instance, British Prime Minister David Lloyd George, who could speak Welsh, reminded the Irish nationalist and Gaelic extremist Eamon de Valera that the Celts never had a word for republic. It was an idea given to them by the English.
Going by this logic, one must also note the fact that there was no democracy among the barbaric Angles and Saxon tribes. It was not an English idea, but a Greek one.
This is our own history too. If you love America, you should also love the power that gave us our sense of inalienable rights, rights traceable back to Magna Carta. It all started in America with the British Empire, a great liberty-loving empire,
Who loved liberty for its own officials and colonialists, but not for its own colonial subjects.
It is the empire's legacy, the English-speaking world, that remains the great global guardian of freedom today. I'm H.W. Crocker for Prager University.
So, after seeing this video in its entirety, we can only conclude that either this man is blatantly lying or he is really not informed about the brutalities and tyrannies of the British Empire. It caused famines, looted kingdoms, destroyed human lives, and devastated economies throughout the globe. It was no messiah of civil liberties, it was a brutal colonial force. So that's the end of today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. In case you did, don't forget to like my video, subscribe to my channel if you like videos like this. Don't forget to hit the bell icon and please bear with my horribly Indian accent. Thank you guys. See you next time.